We are recording, so I'm going to say again, good morning and welcome to Learning Agendas and Data Storytelling. Okay. There we go. So this morning, our goal is to review some of the things that data and policy analytics do and the role of evaluation and impact. If you joined us a few weeks ago for our kickoff, we talked a lot about what the evaluation and impact unit has been doing over the last year and where we fit into data and policy analytics and the state business at large. And today we're going to focus really closely on this idea of the learning agenda as a roadmap, a guidepost, a North Star, a charter, a set of guiding questions that you can use in your work. All of these capacity building workshops are geared towards folks who have American Rescue Fund plans, American Rescue Plan funds. It's still early, coffee's still kicking in. And the goal is to help you. Many of these projects have just really kicked off over the summer into the fall. And as you get the work going, or you're really expanding work that's already been underway, we want to provide a way of thinking about how to collect information and use information to demonstrate the impact of your work. And a learning agenda is one way to do that. We're going to talk a little bit about how you can get learning agenda started for your work and the connection between our own learning agenda for our evaluation and impact work and some new dashboarding and data storytelling work that we're doing here in our unit. So hopefully this works as an agenda for folks. By way of a reminder, again, I'm Rachel Leventhal-Weiner. I'm the Director of Evaluation and Impact here in the Office of Policy and Management, and my colleague, Augusta Irichukwu. Augusta, maybe you can wave hi because you're on video,
Hello.
so people can see you. Augusta's going to
Yes.
join the conversation later. She's our research analyst in the unit. We're going to remind you a little bit about our unit. So Data and Policy Analytics is actually a group of about 15 folks here at the Office of Policy and Management. We have a lot of responsibilities for the state. So we're responsible for the Open Data Portal, which is the place that all agencies can post their data openly to be shared with the public, the media, legislators, other state agency colleagues. And that is available at data.ct.gov. And we'll remind everyone where some of the data storytelling and data sets live at the end of our workshop. We oversee P20WIN, which is the preschool through age 20 workforce information network. That's the state's statewide longitudinal data system. It's a data sharing arrangement we're up to about 14 or 15 agencies now, including some folks in the judicial branch. And that group of folks has a set of legal agreements and data sharing agreements to allow people internal to state government and external to state government to request data that's linked together. I'm going to talk about that in a future workshop, why that arrangement is really important. We oversee all of the geographic information systems work. The geographic information officer is our colleague here in our unit, and there's a group of about 5 analysts that work with him on all the GIS data. We oversee the drafting and execution of the state data plan. So that's how the state's going to use their data resources. And finally, we hold the evaluation and impact work, which is I would say all of last year, I said a new function, but it's about a year old now. And the goal here is to focus first on American Rescue Plan funded projects for the state, thinking about how we can use information in the administration of those programs and funds to demonstrate impact and make investments in things that work. This is really good for all of state business. So there might be folks joining us today who discovered these capacity building workshops through other channels. And we're excited to have you because this is good for all state business, not just for the American Rescue Plan funded projects. Just to give you a little more focus on why we're focused on evaluation impact today, you've seen this slide a million times if you've been to any other capacity building workshops. So the state received $2.8 billion from the U.S. Treasury Department going back almost 3 years now. And all of this work builds on the Evidence-Based Policymaking Act of 2018, signed into law into 2019. In that act, there is a heavy emphasis on developing learning agendas and making evaluation questions and plans, focusing on gathering data and using data to both guide program administration and to make policy decisions. So we see this as a really unprecedented opportunity to improve data culture in the state. So this is where we're focused on with all of these capacity building workshops. If you have other questions about the American Rescue Plan funds, how we're doing, that's something we can talk about as well, probably offline because we have a lot to cover today. Evaluation and impact data are really important for agencies. They allow you to answer questions from all kinds of constituencies. Evaluation and impact data allow you to make decisions about your work that's grounded in evidence. Like, should we decide to do something in one way or another way? Well, what do our data tell us about how the work is going and which way might benefit our clients or constituents? It helps you understand and really demonstrate the impact of your work, and it allows you to provide evidence to the legislature about the sustainability and scalability of your work. And this is something that we're really focused on right now as we enter into um, budget drafting season. And I know a lot of legislative budget options were due to OPM just this month or at the end of last month. So folks are really starting to angle towards legislative session, which is a short session. But there's a lot of talk and buzz about the funds, the American Rescue Plan funds, what's been spent, what's being spent, the sort of the status where everyone is. So this is really the time to be looking in your own backyards and thinking a lot about um, how you're going to demonstrate that your program is working and that you need more funds to sustain it. I'm taking a quick look at my list just to make sure if you're unmuted, if you wouldn't mind muting, that would be great. I know that sometimes background noise comes into play. Thanks for doing that. And just to sort of, focus in a little bit further on these particular functions of evaluation and impact data, this is actually information we shared with an interagency commission. We wanted to really show them why evaluation impact is so important to be focused on, because there's just some basic questions you want to answer. There's some things that you want to actually inform decision or policies, measure milestones, prioritize your investments, and great data stories come from doing this work. If you're here today, most likely you understand that and maybe even agree. Or maybe you're here to learn more. So I just want to you'll see some of the same content information cycle up multiple times because it's sometimes really in the course of doing our regular work, sometimes we aren't focused as much on taking a really good look at our data, making sure the quality of the data are good, making sure we understand our foundational facts and sort of basic insights. Sometimes that can get lost in sort of the regular business of doing the work. But knowing the impact actually helps you as a project leader, you as a division leader, or as a member of your agency make a better case for doing the work and continuing the work. So we're going to focus today on something called a learning agenda. You might be thinking to yourself, what's a learning agenda? And a learning agenda is, we're going to talk about it in the abstract, but at the end of the day, it's a document. It could be a PowerPoint slide. It could be a bunch of Post-it notes on your desk. It could be a document that's signed by everyone who's doing the work. It could be something that you share or you start every meeting with. It's really a foundational set of questions, things that you want to know the answers to. So think about the agenda that comes up at the beginning of every meeting. Here's what we're going to accomplish in our conversation. A learning agenda is very similar. Here's what we're going to learn in the course of doing this project. It doesn't have to be set in stone. It doesn't have to necessarily be um, sort of remain unchanged. It's a flexible and iterative document, but it's a set of questions or things that you're really curious about that you want to know as either the person leading the work or the person partnering on the work. So, and the Learning Agenda is actually an element of that Evidence-Based Policymaking Act. In order to be able to make evaluation plans or assess what capacity you have in an agency, first you have to figure out, what do you want to know? So a learning agenda is a plan, and you can make that plan even if the work has already happened or started. There are things that you might be interested in learning about the work. It allows you to actually bring in some performance data, metrics that you pick yourself, or insights that you generate from the data that you collect as an agency. When you make a learning agenda and you're using information, whether you realize it or not, you're also doing continuous quality improvement of your data. So when you first collect your data doing the program, maybe you don't realize that some fields are missing, either randomly or strategically. So now you have to go back and say, okay, well, we really wanted to know this one thing. It's based on this one field, and half of the data are missing. So a learning agenda really helps you focus and hone in on, what do you really want to know, and do you have the information to answer that question? And it makes you use that information routinely. So you're not just saying, okay, we're going to do this whole project, and then we're going to check and see how we did. You're going to be checking in on the information at different checkpoints all along the project sort of life course. And as I've said, and I'll say multiple times, this is nothing set in stone. It provides you with a way of answering leadership questions around what you hope to accomplish. It allows you to work with clients and customers to say, or your constituency to say, here are the things that we hope to know when this project is complete. And it helps you kind of define the universe of what you're able to show for a particular project. Any questions so far about either the concept of a learning agenda, um, what it means to set metrics, all of those things, because we're going to talk through some of the stages. Lynn, I see your hand up.
Hi, Rachel. Thank you. I was very curious about the emerging properties of the learning agenda and how you're describing it. So I wonder, when we have contracts that have set performance evaluation measures or indicators, is it reasonable to ask the employee, well, first of all, engage the employer in this learning kind of agenda, engage the contractor, and then adapt, even though the performance indicator is very specifically stated? Can we actually build in flexibility to ask them to do more? I just wonder about that because we might get resistance, but if they're really involved in a learning agenda, then maybe they would be less resistant. I just wonder your thoughts on that, if it makes sense.
That
Thank
is
you.
a great question. So we'll talk through where it fits in the sort of in the I'm lowering your hand, Lynn, just so it doesn't stress me out. Um, Contracts and agreements, if you're not doing the data collection, contracts and agreements are great places to bake in these expectations. But Lynn, you're totally right. We're going to talk a little bit about how to develop your learning agenda. And the state is a public funder, private philanthropy, private funders. Different funders have different ways of engaging the ways that they fund folks. So some it's more of a top-down approach because you have expectations, like your federal funder is telling you as the state that you need to collect a certain thing. And so then you send that off to your contractor or your beneficiary, your subrecipients, whoever they are in this arrangement. But sometimes there are things you're curious about that aren't your federal requirements, that aren't your state requirements, that you as a unit or an agency or maybe your commissioner has some kind of like special curiosity about. And that's absolutely a place where you'd want to actually engage the folks and have conversations about the kinds of things that you want to collect. My experience with doing this work in the past, like with social sector organizations and different state agencies, is that not everyone has the same capacity to collect things that are outside of what the standard data system might have, what your data system collects, or what they're used to doing. So I would build in some lead up time, some runway time to have conversations about why you're doing something a specific way. Like by way of example, and I don't see my OEC well, I might have OEC colleagues on this call, but when at the Office of Early Childhood, we decided to go towards very specific metrics that we were building into contracts for our home visiting providers. So those are folks that go to support families that aren't quite yet in sort of a maltreatment and neglect crisis situation, but could be trending in that direction to provide support. And we had extra special interest in serving prenatal moms and moms of color. And so we worked with all of our providers to understand that part of the way we wanted to collect data was to make sure that these fields were complete, and these were some of the things that we were really focused on, because those were the things that we wanted to study, benchmark, and show impact about. So you'll see in a second, you're probably curious about a lot of things. Um, Practically speaking, baking some of these things into some of these agreements is absolutely a fair expectation, but you may need to build, if it's something new or different, or it's a departure from the norm, you may have to build in a little bit of runway time. I hope that answers your question, Lynn. Awesome. All right, so where do I start? This sounds like a great idea. It sounds like it would be great to have a North Star or sort of uh, a sort of a guiding map. I know where I'm going to be going. I know where the roadmap's going to take me. And really, you've heard me say this before. If you come to capacity building workshops, you have to start where you are, but you have to start with this question, which is, what do you want to know about the work? And ultimately, if we think about data storytelling, what claims and stories do you want to be able to tell at the end? So often this is an individualized process. You have to sit, yourself or your members of your team have to sit themselves and say, What are some of the questions that we have about this work? I'm going to show you at the end. I hope we'll have time where I can show you some of the federal resources, like the evaluation.gov resources, where there's some sample questions. But if we think back to, why evaluation and impact data are important, some of the general analytics questions like the who, what, where, when, and why kinds of questions are really important and should be part of that learning agenda if you don't have a good sense of them. We're going to show you our learning agenda as well. You can see how we integrate those kinds of general analytics questions into our learning agenda. There are a lot of questions, if you've been doing your work for a long time, there might be questions that you say to yourself, well, what if we served more people or fewer people? What if we serve people in a different way? What if we change the population focus because, we haven't seen any kind of difference in the way that they transition to a new, whatever it is after our program? Sometimes there are things that are, pie in the sky, like, gosh, if we had more funds or more time or more staff, what are some of the things that we'd want to actually tackle? And is there some way to kind of pilot that or prototype that idea and understand what would happen? And then ultimately, what we want to know here at Evaluation and Impact and what folks are really interested in knowing is, did it matter? Did doing this work with these particular federal funds in this particular pandemic recovery moment matter more for the populations that we serve? I think at the end of the day, what's exciting to work with folks who come to capacity building workshops and who listen to us talk about data and why we love it so much, I think we care about serving the populations that we serve and making a difference in their lives. But this isn't things you can do on your own. So you start here, brainstorming alone, and then you think together. So then you start bringing together all of the folks on your team. Think about the audience for the particular, either the questions that you're asking or the claims and stories that you're trying to tell. And then you write everything down because people are going to have lots of different questions. And this could be a workshop that we partner with you to help you with your learning agenda. It could be something we do virtually, where we make a virtual sticky note board, or where we come on site and work with your folks and we do, more sort of hands-on with post-it notes. But this is a time where you write everything down and you don't necessarily make your decisions in the moment, but you just kind of consider all the possible questions that you could have. And then there's a process that in workshops that we've led where that's called affinity mapping, where you kind of say, oh, well, this question is kind of like this question. So maybe we can kind of combine these two, and then we'll actually have one question rather than two or three or five. Because a learning agenda, there's no good perfect length necessarily. You could have 20 questions in your learning agenda. You could have 3 questions in your learning agenda. The more concise the agenda is, the easier it is to kind of always look at the work and say, well, this points back to what we're trying to understand here. And we'll show you how that works with an actual learning agenda. And then the reflecting and revising and revisiting process is just, again, to emphasize that this is meant to be an iterative process. So you could try this, once or twice or over the course of a couple of weeks, where you say, we're going to set our learning agenda this month for the next quarter or the next year. And it's meant to be something that's, you're using it as a guide map, but that you discover along the way that what you thought was going to happen is actually you get to that one checkpoint and you're like, it's not what I thought it was. It actually needs to be a little bit different. So this, you start here, brainstorming alone, what's meaningful and important to you, and then you think together and you work. And this is a place, Lynn, where your constituency is a part of this process. Community engagement is a really big part of the American Rescue Plan funded sort of ethos, that we want to both serve the community in the way that it makes sense. And as a state actor, it's a little different than we work with folks across the country who are municipalities or counties. So they have a little closer connection to their community the way they see it. But that, your communities could be the customers, clients, constituencies that you serve, or it could be your contractors who are the ones leading the work. And then you take all of those questions and you prioritize, and I emphasize for now. So this doesn't have to be forever. Maybe there's an immediate need in the next 6 months because legislative session is coming, your committee is meeting, and you want to actually show them something quickly. Or maybe you want to make sure that you have sort of a near-term and a long-term question on that agenda. I say document, document, document. We have a great workshop from our last series back in the spring around documentation, but sometimes it's important to document why you picked one question over another. So writing everything down is important, and then doing that super meta exercise of actually documenting why you picked a particular question over another, or why you're going to tackle this question first and this, all of that is super relevant to actually just prioritizing for now to get something on paper. So you start by, you know, it feels like it should look like this: start alone, think together, prioritize for now. But like I said, this is a really iterative process. Together, you prioritize, you realize you get some answers, then you're like, I got to think about this again. And then we need to think together again, and then you need to prioritize again. And if you actually read the Evidence-Based Policymaking Act, a lot of the work, there's a chart that appears that looks very similar to this. You make your learning agenda, you study and understand, you make some changes to program administration, it adjusts the learning agenda, then you study and understand, and you make some changes to the way you do service provision. And this is all in service of making the actual programs better. So it can start out like this the very first time, but then know that as projects and programs progress and change and sort of morph over time, they are meant to be iterative. So you can hold yourselves to your own learning agenda, but it will change and morph over time. So I'm going to pause for another moment before I jump into the next section about why we need a learning agenda. Other questions, reflections, thoughts?
Excuse me, Rachel, could you please send us that policy, evidence-based policy making act so we know how to look it up?
Yep, absolutely. I'm going to send a
Thank
number
you.
of resources after the, it's funny,
That's great. Thank you.
oh, no worries. When I started the role, a big part of the work was just getting to read all of the federal guidance, which many folks who've been in state service for a long time have lots of experience doing. And then you kind of do the work and you get a little space from the guidance or the statute, but then you go back and you're like, oh, wow, this is so much more meaning now that the work has been going on for a while. We're also doing some really exciting work here at OPM, thinking about how to make policies that sort of um, rely on, expect the use of evidence in making all kinds of budget and policymaking decisions. So we're rereading this act. It's not like, riveting suspense novel reading, but it actually is, it's pretty readable and logical, quite honestly. It's the timing of it was very tricky, passed just before the pandemic, but Treasury's really picked it up. So why do we need a learning agenda? And when I was talking with Scott Gall, our leader of our unit, he was saying, I want to make sure people, when they walk away from the initial workshop, because it's kind of like a philosophical concept, but it's really meant to be like a concrete thing that you have that you can hold in your hands or see on your computer screen. Learning agendas help agencies do a lot of these things. They help you answer questions and make decisions and understand. Perhaps some of these things might look a little familiar because this is what good evaluation and impact data also help you do. So if you set your learning agenda, you'll be able to do all kinds of things like address questions that people have, make decisions, and demonstrate that there's evidence that things work. And these are all the same things that our evaluation impact data can help you do as well. So the learning agenda is a tool to get you there. So I want to show you a couple of sample learning agendas. There's a lot of text on this screen. Don't worry about the text so much, but there's 2 learning agendas I'm going to show you specifically. And after our conversation today, I'm going to send you a link to evaluation.gov resources where I'm going to show you all kinds of learning agenda questions that you can actually tackle. I think we'll actually have some time to tackle. I'll show you some of the sample questions. So the Preschool through 20 Workforce Information Network is a part of our data and policy analytics work. And really, this is the learning agenda was a requirement of a federal grant that we had. What are the things that are important to you as the statewide longitudinal data sharing table? It used to be that the guiding question around data sharing and data linking was, how do we improve public education? But as the oversight of this particular table shifted from CSCU over to OPM, we expanded that lens a little bit. And we started to think about, well, what are some of the ways that we're seeing college and career success? How are students ready for school? How are access to fiscal resources and financial resources helping families? What does the transition look like from school into the workforce? And what are some of the barriers to success? And the student readiness and barriers to success questions specifically really kind of open the table, open the door for lots of other data to be included in data requests or to be linked up to answer questions. So whenever the P20 Win folks get a data sharing request, they often want to make sure that it adheres to some of these expectations or questions that we have. And these are flexible. We can adjust them. We're actually going into a new phase of this federal grant, so we're probably going to make some adjustments or expansions of these questions. But if you were to ask the P20 Win folks, from the early days, well, what was the focus of the work? What did you want to know? We would say, how can we improve public education? Now, what we would say is we want to do a lot more just to understand all the ways that our systems are interconnected to support kids, families, and communities in the process of public education, transition to workforce, and ensuring opportunities for everyone. So this is one example of a learning agenda. I'm going to shift to our learning agenda. So this is the learning agenda for our evaluation and impact unit. And we actually just shared this with the Interagency Commission on ending the achievement gap. We wanted them to have a sense of the things that we were trying to understand as the evaluation and impact unit ourselves. To be honest, you could actually probably take out American Rescue Plan funded projects and just insert all state business. I say that in a lot of our capacity building workshops, but we're interested in understanding who's being served and supported by these projects. How is the work connected across state agencies? How can we incorporate evidence into making policy decisions? How do we know what impact the work is having? And what should be scaled and supported by the general fund when these funds dissipate and end in 2026? These are big questions. They're not, we can't answer them in a standard way necessarily because who is being served and supported looks different depending on what agency you're in, depending on even within an agency, what project you're staffed on. But these are just some general guiding questions so that if we get a little bit lost and we're not sure what we need to be showing to our constituents, to our leaders here at OPM, to the legislature, we can come back to our learning agenda to say, what do we want to know? We want to know the answers to these questions. I'm going to press pause here for a second because I just showed you a lot of text. And Augusta, I'm going to call an audible and just show the evaluation.gov learning agenda dashboard real fast, if that's okay with you, before we switch gears.
Sounds good.
Okay, cool. So this is what a learning agenda is. It's just one slide. It could be a document. Like I said, it could be a handwritten. It could be a big giant sticky note paper that you stick up in the office. And every time you walk past it, you remind yourself, oh, that's our learning agenda. There's so many ways that you could make this learning agenda and have everyone kind of connect with it, hew to it, agree to it. So I want to show you just a few other examples. So evaluation.gov is the federal entity that was established to actually connect all of these different learning agenda resources, evaluation plans. There are a number of really important resources that are listed here as examples. I happen to have read a lot of the learning agendas from the federal agencies. Many of them are very long. So I don't want to subject you to having to comb through, though it could be interesting for you to see your federal partners, your federal funders, what they're interested in learning. What I'm going to click on here is the questions dashboard. And what I love about this particular data visualization is that most of the time when we've talked about data culture, data literacy, we think of data as being numbers. And in this case, the questions are the data. So someone in evaluation.gov read all of the learning agendas and evaluation plans, and they went through and they coded all of them for different themes. And you're going to see we did something similar with all the American Rescue Plan funded projects to actually think about how we're going to tell a story with all of our American Rescue Plan project data. So in this case, if you were looking for inspiration in terms of how to ask your question, or you weren't exactly sure how to focus in on what's a question that makes sense and maybe is also important to your federal funders. So what they've done is they've taken all of the different topics that the questions are related to. Just going to scroll down a little further, as well as all of the agencies, the federal agencies that they're related to. And then if you're interested in learning about a particular topic, you can either click on these bubbles up here, and some of the bubbles are too small for them to show exactly what agency or topic it is. So you've got the topics or you've got the agencies. And right now they include about 756 learning agenda questions across all federal agencies. So in this case, the questions are the data that we're sorting. if I've gone like way out there for you, so like way too cerebral, just hang with me because I'm just going to do 1 or 2 searches so you can see how this will work. You can already see that there are some questions. These are probably like all the questions just organized. Probably doesn't actually have too much of a level of organization. So one thing that everyone talks about a lot is housing. So if I click over here by topic, you'll see some of these things adjust. And what you'll see is that there are 120 learning agenda questions across all federal agencies related to housing. There are questions related to equity that also have housing as a component of them. And the agencies that are asking this question, it's HUD, or Housing and Urban Development, as well as the Department of Transportation and the VA. And then there are a number of what they call cross-government, which means that maybe it's 2 agencies together, or it's one agency in partnership with another. If we just scroll down, it lists some of those questions. I want to look at not the cross-government ones. I want to find some HUD questions. So our current building efficiency, safety, and resiliency codes for various types of housing adequate? That's a question for on the HUD learning agenda. They're wondering and worrying now about what are some of the codes as we get into sort of an energy efficiency housing remediation space. As a state, we actually have a few projects related to those topics. That's one of the questions that HUD is asking. So if we were to pull up the whole HUD learning agenda, we would see HUD has a number of questions. And this is it's sort of one of the shortest and probably least jargony one, but it's a really important one. We're doing a lot as a state to address things like this when it comes to promoting healthy and lead-safe homes, as well as energy efficiency and housing remediation to get rid of other kind of harmful products like asbestos. So this is a resource that you have available to you, and I'm going to share this resource afterwards. It might seem a little overwhelming, but sometimes it's easier to react to something than it is to try and start something new yourself. You can always model some of your learning agenda questions after some of your federal partners. And that's a really great place to start because if it's of interest to them, it'll probably eventually be something that you'll be tasked with doing some work related to it. So this resource, like I said, is at evaluation.gov. I'll share it after our meeting today. And you'll have a number of different ways to actually take a look at all of the different evaluation plans or evidence plans for the different federal agencies. Like I said, there's some cross-government plans. There's some really creative work that's happening in the Biden administration that links different agencies together. So this is one place where you can actually sort of apply or learn a little bit more about how to develop your own learning agenda. So I'm going to come back to us as I switch gears and remind us of our learning agenda. I'm going to just move along. Before I move along, I want to press pause, make sure everyone's still with us. It's okay if you're quiet. It's okay if you don't want to talk or ask questions. That's cool too. So, like I said at the start of our conversation, learning agendas help you tell great data stories. So you may have come today saying, I can't wait to hear all about the data storytelling content. And we'll have another workshop that's focused more exclusively on data storytelling, specifically on data visualization, because that's what people like to talk about. We want to show you how our learning agenda is connected to the kind of data storytelling that we want to be doing to create greater transparency and understanding about the American Rescue Plan. So I'm going to shift gears and display what is an early revision of our current dashboard. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Augusta to talk us through the process of making this particular prototype and our thinking around it.
Thanks, Rachel. So currently we are working on reinventing our dashboard. The original dashboard that we had definitely served the purpose of, telling the talking about the projects based off of the expenditure categories. But in alignment with our learning agenda, we wanted to be able to talk about the connected work that's happening throughout the state, who folks are serving, as well as are there projects that have, used their funding and maybe are projects that can be scaled up. As we met with folks throughout the year, we kind of spoke to various agencies and we learned that there are some agencies that are working on projects that you wouldn't think would happen at that particular agency, and that these projects are connected to work that folks are doing at other agencies. So we are working on telling that story based off of different thematic codings. So we have things related to IT modernization, behavioral health, K through 12 education, early childhood, public health, broadly writ, and things of that nature. So we first started with drafting the Justice and Public Safety dashboard and just kind of looking at the data that we had for those projects and what projects would we categorize within this particular issue area. Um, we started first by looking at that data and then slicing and dicing the data in different ways to say, hey, we looked at it based off of when these projects were enacted, or we looked at the spending, or we looked at the budget. And we documented, what does this information tell us? What questions have arisen because of this particular view of the data and things of that nature. From there, we created a couple of visuals. These are the visuals that you see on the screen to speak more to what's going on within this particular thematic code. On the upper left-hand side, you can see the budget breakdown by agency. So most of the Justice and Public Safety funds are in the Judicial Department. Just so that everyone's aware, the Judicial Department is responsible for administering funds that have been used to offset the reduction of federal funding for victims of crimes. So that project's about 5 million. So if we had coded that a little bit differently, a lot of the visuals would turn out pretty different, but that's the lion's share of the funds for this particular thematic code. And then you can see the other agencies that are also housing projects related to justice and public safety in that particular visual. On the top right-hand corner, you can see the spending progress by agency. So we see that Office of Policy Management has about 2 million in this particular area. They've spent it, and then you can see the other agencies as well. In the bottom, the bottom left-hand corner, we ended up breaking up the projects by subcategories. We looked at the information from budget as well as the allocation tracker to get a better sense of what the projects are doing for the community. And we ideally want to highlight probably 4 themes or subcategories. That would be community intervention. So these are preventative measures to prevent folks from becoming justice involved. There's the justice piece, which is creating effective service delivery for folks who are involved in the legal system, reentry services, ways or programs that are used to help folks reenter society and safer communities. We're still trying to figure out the best way to label that category, but this category is for reactive measures. So one example would be, during the pandemic, there was an increase in, dangerous driving and collisions on secondary roadways. So there is a task force that is working on targeting, speed related violations so that we can, reduce the amount of collisions that are happening across the state. So those are some of the subcategories that we're hoping to highlight in a future iteration of the dashboard. And in the last panel, we want to be transparent to showcase what projects we've categorized in this particular thematic code, as well as give folks the opportunity to drill down a bit to learn about, the project and the current status of the project as we progress throughout the administration of the American Rescue Plan funds. This is, static images, an initial draft, but this is something that we are hoping to work with agencies to iterate through and tell the story for this particular theme.
Great. Thanks, Augusta.
Mhm.
And what we're showing here is sort of a way of thinking about showing you our process a little bit to think about, okay, so we are curious about how American Rescue Plan funds are being spent and how the work is connected across agencies. These top 2 panes that Augusta just talked through show you the breakdown by agency and the spending progress. But as we were working through what the projects actually were, Augusta was the one that said, there is some different ways it all isn't just all justice and public safety. There's different ways of thinking about justice and public safety. For instance, there's a big IT modernization effort that's happening within a few different agencies related to justice and public safety. So we don't want people to think that all of these funds are going towards proactive or reactive measures. Some of it's just upgrading our infrastructure, which is actually allowable under the American Rescue Plan. I just want to flag that this snapshot of this table, all of these data around the project level details are now in a data set on the Open Data Portal, which I'll share with folks after this meeting as well. So we started with this, we started with our learning agenda, and then it helped us really come up with some answers or next steps. I want to be mindful that we're right about time, so I'm not going to necessarily rush through the next slide or two, but I just want to reiterate that how do we get started? We already talked about this actually, but I wanted to kind of include at the end that there is the opportunity to gather your folks together, create goals and questions, document those questions, and think about, remember, always the larger story that you're trying to tell. So here's part of the bigger story we're trying to tell is how are these funds connected and who are we serving? Oftentimes in making this documentation, you realize that you actually lack some of the data resources that you need or need to adjust your data collection efforts. And audience is a big part of this. We're not going to get into that as closely this morning, but it's definitely an important consideration in both drafting your learning agenda and data storytelling. So I showed you this resource, evaluation.gov, and I'm going to send it to you afterwards as well, but it will be linked here in our deck. And just to give you a sense of what we're going to be working on now and next steps. So we are working now to actually connect projects that are up and running with applied researchers and evaluators. We're working on our dashboard upgrades. We just showed you our first step towards that. And we're continuing to build capacity across the sort of lifespan of these funds. The next phase for this learning agenda work is actually, we're really excited. We're going to block off the same time over the next 3 weeks, and we're going to open up the opportunity to have a workshop experience. So it's not a required workshop for you to attend. There won't be content the way that we're presenting it today. But what we're hoping is that folks will want to come and work with us either individually or as teams. We're going to have a worksheet that you can work through to kind of start thinking about what is sort of like a burning question or driving question that's helping you get your learning agenda set up for your project, and then help you or your team start to draft that learning agenda together. So we're going to make this the month of the learning agenda. After today's workshop, you're going to receive a number of resources. As Lynn requested, a link to the Evidence-Based Policymaking Act, a link to evaluation.gov, this deck, which includes a number of links within it, and a link back to any other resources that we think are relevant moving forward. And then you'll see some optional calendar invitations coming up on subsequent Wednesdays. Usually feel free to join or not join those. If you join, though, come prepared to actually, it is a working session. If we have enough folks from different teams, what we'll do is we'll assemble breakout rooms so you can work together. We can pop between them to be supportive to your team. And if those times don't work for your team, but you want to work separately together with your team or your agency, we can talk about that as well. So we are a minute or so over, tried so hard to keep it right to time, but I want to, if there's any like lingering or burning questions, I'm happy to answer those now. And if not, we're really grateful for your engagement and attendance today, and we hope that you'll join us for an upcoming learning agenda working session. This is the moment for questions.
I have one last question, if you don't mind.
Not at all. Thanks, Lynn.
Thank you. When you're talking about the workshops, are they just for people who work for the state of Connecticut, or are we allowed to invite people from the outside? For example, someone who's contracted to do an ARPA reentry service with ARPA funding?
Let's talk about that offline, because I think that
Okay.
initially I think these workshops are for our state agency colleagues, but I can envision, and this is part of the work that we were charged with doing, working with external contractors, subrecipients, beneficiaries, those sorts of folks who are doing the work on behalf of the agency. I just think we'd probably need more context about the work and the parties involved, and just to make it a really successful experience for everyone. But that's something we're open to. So let's talk about that offline.
Sure. Thank you.
Great. thanks everyone for your engagement this morning. Thank you for staying an extra minute or so. I will share out this recording and other resources later today. Thanks again.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Have a good day.
You too. I'm going to stop this recording if it will allow me.